Welcome back to episode 2 of the Book Corner. As always, I am your host, Becca, and in this show, I'm going to take you through some of my favorite books and give you a little bit of analysis of those books towards the end of the episodes. Last episode, we spoke about a book that I quickly grew obsessed with, The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Speaking of obsessiveness, today I am going to be talking about a book called A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. So, I'm a little obsessive when it comes to things that I enjoy, and nothing has made that clearer to me than with this book. When I first bought this book, it sat on my shelf for a couple of months until I was finally able to get around to reading it on a family vacation. On the drive to our location, my dad and brother were sitting in the front seat, going on and on and on about like sports or something that I just couldn't relate to. I wasn't really paying attention, so I grabbed my book and I decided to start reading it. I put on a little bit of Taylor Swift, specifically Electric Touch, and finally started reading A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And boy, was I hooked. The rest of the day was super busy. I couldn't get super far into it, but by the next day, I was committed to finishing that book. Around the early afternoon, that first book was finished, and I knew that there was no way that I was going to wait like 2 days for Amazon to deliver the next 2 books in the series. So I got in my car, I drove to Target, and I bought the rest of the series. Was it impulsive? Yes. Was I thoroughly invested? Also yes. And if you thought it was going to take me like a couple of days to finish the rest of the series, you would be completely wrong. I spent the entire rest of that day reading the rest of the series, finishing the 3rd book close to midnight. I was exhausted, but I needed to get it done. And there was absolutely no way I was going to put those books down until I finished them. This was now 2 summers ago, and the book has yet to leave my mind. I do want to say that there is a TV adaptation now of this book, and I certainly have some thoughts on that. But this is far too of a rabbit hole for me to get into right now. Now, without further ado, this is the Book Corner, and let's get into the review of Holly Jackson's A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder was released on May 2nd, 2019. It is a young adult mystery/thriller book, and it is part of a larger series of 3 books, all following the point of view of the same main character. Here is the official synopsis for the book. This is the story of an investigation turned obsession. Pretty and popular high school senior Andy Bell was murdered by her boyfriend Sal Singh, who then killed himself. It was all anybody could talk about. And 5 years later, Pip sees how tragedy still haunts her town. Now a senior herself, Pip decides to re-examine the closed case for her final project, at first just to cast doubt on the original investigation. But soon she discovers a trail of dark secrets that might actually prove Sal innocent. And the line between past and present begins to blur. Someone in Fairview doesn't want Pip digging around for answers, and now her own life might be in danger. Before we really dig into this book, I do want to say that if any of this sounds intriguing to you guys, please stop listening and go pick up this book for yourself. It's a really good mystery, and I don't want to be the one to spoil it all for you. That being said, if you have read the book or just don't care, let's carry on. This book has a 4.32 star rating on Goodreads with over 1.2 million ratings and 140,000 reviews. Some of the positive reviews read, "I'm still shaky, incoherent. I've even requested a translator to articulate my thoughts properly. My nails have seen better days, and I'm confused and dizzy. But I'm also smiling and filled with happiness." Another reads, "You heard it here first, folks. I found a new favorite YA thriller. I'm stoked by how much I loved this." But of course, there's always negative reviews, some of which read, "Genuinely asking myself why I read this. This book had it all. Bad writing, a completely unrealistic plot, white savior trope, I'm not like other girls, and probably the most annoying main character I've ever read about." Another reads, "I made a Goodreads account just so I could give this book 1 star." As I stated with my previous episode, with a book having so many reviews, it's hard to imagine that there would be no criticism that followed. Many of the reviews that I saw felt as though they were too old to be reading the book and that it should have been targeted to a different audience. I'll get into more of this later in the episode, but I did want to mention it here. Now, let's dive deeper into the plot of this book. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder follows the senior year of Pippa Fitzimobi, more often called Pip. My copy, and anyone else's copy from the US, has this book taking place in Fairview, Connecticut, although the original story does take place in the UK. For the sake of my sanity, I'm going to be treating this story as though it takes place in Connecticut, since that's the version that's stuck in my head. We open this book at the beginning of Pip's senior capstone project. She said that she is investigating the ways in which media portrays suspects in a murder case, even if they've not been convicted of the crime. This is done through a case study of the disappearance of Andy Bell 5 years prior. However, we quickly learn that she has an ulterior motive to this project. She wants to prove that the person that the town is convinced committed the crime, Sal Singh, is actually innocent. Andy and Sal were together at the time, and Sal died by suicide days after Andy disappeared, along with a confession text sent to his father. Everything seemed to point to him. According to the publicly available story, Sal had been spending the night of Andy's disappearance with his friends Max, Naomi, Jake, and Millie. Sal told police he left there at 12:15, which is confirmed by his friends and his father, who said he got home at 12:50, as the walk usually takes about 30 minutes. The following Tuesday, Sal's friends spoke to the police and said that they lied for him and that he actually left at 10:30 that night. Tuesday night, the police also found a body, but it wasn't Andy's. It was Sal's. Andy's car was found the next morning, and the police concluded their investigation by the following Monday. They believed that Sal had kidnapped and murdered Andy before committing suicide following the revelation of his lies about his alibi. Their evidence supporting this was that Andy's phone was found on Sal's body, her blood was found under his fingernails as well as in the trunk of her car, and his fingerprints were found on her steering wheel and dashboard. Andy, however, was never found. The story of this book is told through some unconventional means, which I think really adds to the story. We get transcripts of interviews that Pip conducts, including early ones with the Missing Persons Bureau and local reporters. We also get written out notes that she's taking for the project, and this is all in addition to the traditional narrative storytelling that we get. The first interview of importance, though, is with Sal's younger brother, Ravi. We learn that Sal had been acting normal the night of Andy's disappearance and spent the entire weekend obsessively calling her phone after finding out that she was missing. Sal had been found with Andy's phone on his body, but it doesn't really make that much sense that he was obsessively calling her phone if he had had it the whole time. Everything that Ravi is saying about Sal sounds to be the opposite of a murderer. The only thing that really doesn't make sense is the confession text and the fact that the sleeping pills that Sal used were his father's. Ravi also makes the point that he believes that Andy's father, Jason Bell, had something to do with her disappearance. Pip is quick to tell Ravi the real reason that she's investigating the case, which is that she just can't believe that Sal did it, as he'd always been so kind to her and she always looked up to him. Ravi then agrees to team up and help Pip solve this case. In the next interview with Sal's best friend Naomi, we learn that Sal and Andy didn't have the best relationship and they fought a lot. Naomi reaffirms that Sal did leave at 10:30 and that he asked them to lie about the time that he left. Apparently, they only told police because they didn't want to lie and they thought Sal wouldn't get in trouble for it, as they believed him. Pip also interviews Max, who tells some contradicting stories to Naomi. However, he also agrees that Sal left at 10:30. I know there's a lot of interviews that happen early on in this book, but we do need to work through them as they have a lot of important information. Pip then goes on to interview Naomi's father, Elliot, who is a teacher at the high school. He helps Sal with his application to Yale, but doesn't remember his behavior at school that Tuesday since he was out sick. He has a hard time believing Sal was capable of committing this murder, but he must have done it because of all of the evidence. So here are some of the theories that Pip and Ravi are working with at the current moment. First is the idea that the police are correct, which doesn't really seem accurate. Second, there's the idea that a third party killed Andy and Sal was involved. Finally, there's the theory that someone killed both Andy and Sal and made it look like Sal was responsible. Or, more outlandishly, Andy isn't dead at all. Pip and Ravi then go through Sal's phone, finding out that the confession text is different than all of the other texts that Sal usually sends. His texts are usually all lowercase, but they have horrendous grammar. However, the confession text actually has proper grammar with punctuation, which is not like Sal at all. Pip then tries to interview some of Andy's old friends, Emma and Chloe, but doesn't get much out of them. By pretending to be one of them and texting the other, she is able to learn that Andy had been seeing this mysterious older guy, and there was some big secret that Andy had on her father. Later on, during a camping trip with her friends, Pip finds a note in her sleeping bag that reads, "Stop digging Pippa." Her friends all deny having placed it there, and the only person that Pip can think of that might have done it was Naomi, as she is Pip's best friend's older sister, and she is one of the only potential suspects that Pip has that knew that she was going camping on this trip. As the investigation continues, Pip learns that Andy was not a fan of Elliot Ward and that they knew each other much better than he originally had let on. This leads to her confronting him, and he reveals that he had caught Andy bullying another girl, Nat Da Silva, and brought this to her father's attention. This led to a rather strained relationship between the two of them. Through another conversation with Naomi, Pip learns that Andy got a topless picture of Nat and spread it everywhere, along with threatening her brother who worked at the school. Pip and Ravi then go talk to Nat, and she only wants to talk to Ravi. She does admit that she wanted Andy dead for what she had done to her, even putting a death threat in her locker, but seemed to have a very solid alibi for that night. They also learn that Nat's brother Daniel is a cop, and is also the cop that told Ravi to stop digging into his brother's case. Later on, Pip receives a copy of the transcript of Sal's first interview with the police, and it does not look good. Sal seems very reluctant to answer questions and is very evasive when he does. This causes Pip to reconsider the case, but then she remembers the note and the fact that somebody out there doesn't want her finding out the truth. A few days after this, Pip runs into Becca Bell, Andy's sister. The questions that she asks her quickly grow invasive, and Becca gets really uncomfortable, and later on down the line, Pip eventually admits that this was absolutely the wrong move and she shouldn't have talked to Becca. However, Pip does get an interview with one of Becca's old friends, Jess Walker, who reveals that the dynamic between the sisters and their father was not great, and Jason often demeaned both Becca and Andy. Jess also reveals that she and Becca went to a party, Becca disappeared for a while, and the next morning she asked Jess to take her to get the morning after pill, refusing to say what happened. Apparently, Andy had been seen talking with Max Hastings that night as well. In Pip's mind, Jason is looking worse and worse, and Max is lying about how well he knew Andy. She's able to find a secret Facebook page of Max's named Nancy Tango Tits, but it's private. When Pip ambushes Max at his house the next day, she finds an intimate photo of Andy behind one of his posters, although Max claims that he found it in one of the classrooms at school. He also says that he did know Andy as she'd been dealing drugs and he was buying from her. According to Max, Sal had no idea this was happening. Clearly, these parties, also known as calamities, were holding a lot of answers, so Pip decides it's finally time to attend one. She learns here that Andy was getting drugs from a man named Howie at the train station. After going to the train station a couple of times, she finally spots Howie speaking with Stanley Forbes, the local reporter that Pip spoke to in the beginning of the book. She follows Howie home and sees that his license plate is the same string of letters and numbers that were written in Sal's Notes app. I forgot to mention that, but that was something that both Pip and Ravi found when looking through Sal's phone. This proves that Sal did know about what Andy was doing and was probably what the two were arguing about. Pip and Ravi then decide to ambush Howie using a photo of him dealing to a minor as blackmail. He tells them that Andy had a burner phone, and the two determine that they need to find this. That night, Pip gets a text that reads, "You stupid bitch, leave us alone while you still can." She had to be getting closer to the truth. The next day, she skips school and she and Ravi break into the Bell's house to find the burner phone. They're not able to find it, but they do find Andy's planner filled with different codes and a half-written phone number. They come to the conclusion that the codes are initials for different places. One, the letters IV, end up being a local inn called the Ivy House Inn. Pip and Ravi go to the inn, showing the owner Andy's photo, and the owner confirms that Andy had been there. They speculate that this must be the place where she was meeting the secret older guy, and that this older guy must have a family at home since they couldn't just meet at his house, which rules out Howie as he lives completely alone. Upon returning to Fairview, they see Max and Howie screaming at each other, and this definitely pushes Max higher up her suspect list. I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the main drugs being sold in town were roofies, and there were rumors spreading around that girls were being drugged and raped at these parties. Pip is able to confirm this by messaging different alumni. One person even claims that Nat Da Silva had claimed to have been roofied. Pip determines that Max had to be the one doing this, as Howie said that Andy had been selling to a rich blonde boy, aka Max. Finally, Pip gains access to Max's secret Facebook, and here she finds her smoking gun. There was a photo that showed all of the friends from the night of Andy's disappearance besides Sal. However, there was no way that any of them could have taken the photo, meaning that Sal had to have taken it. She can even see the reflection of the blue shirt Sal had been wearing that night in a window and the time, 12:09, on someone's phone. This was it. This was the photo that could prove that Sal was at Max's house past midnight, meaning that his original story had to have been true. He never left at 10:30. Pip tells Ravi about this, and the two determine that they have to really fully test this out. Even if he did leave at 12:15, he didn't get home until 12:50, still leaving a sort of time gap. They end up walking through the potential situation, giving Sal the benefit of the doubt that absolutely nothing went wrong and he was using the most convenient locations possible when committing the crime. However, it becomes clear very quickly that there is absolutely no way that Sal could have been at Max's house at 12:09, murdered Andy, and made it home by 12:50. After finding this out, Pip goes to confront Naomi, and it just so happens that Max is also there, and the two reveal that weeks before the disappearance, they had gotten into a hit and run, and somehow somebody knew about it and used that information to blackmail them into lying about Sal's alibi. Pip wants to go to the police with the photo, but Naomi convinces her not to, as she doesn't want to get in trouble. Pip agrees, saying that she would solve this some other way. The killer was still out there, and she was determined to find them. Right now, Pip has 5 suspects, which are Jason Bell, Howie Bowers, Nat Da Silva, Daniel Da Silva, and Max Hastings. There were issues with each, but they all seemed to be relatively plausible. When she gets home the next day, she finds that somebody had broken into her room, wrote on her laptop over and over, "You need to stop this Pippa." Pip learns that Daniel Da Silva was close with Jason Bell and is able to speak to Daniel after a police town hall. He does say that he filled out a police report about Max crashing his car near his parents' house, which most likely means that he knew about the hit and run. Very sadly, Pip's dog Barney goes missing in the following days, and they're unable to find him. Pip does get a text saying that she needs to take all of her research and destroy it if she ever wants to see her dog again, which she does. Later that night, Pip's dad reveals that somebody found Barney, but he'd somehow drowned in a river. I am so sorry. This book has a dog death. Trust me, I'm not happy about it either. I literally cried reading it the first time. It made me very upset. Pip is distraught and just wants to give it all up, but Ravi is able to convince her that this is something that the two of them need to see through to the end. They're able to get all of the files that Pip destroyed from the cloud. After laying all of the information out, it all seems to be pointing to Max, but something's not quite adding up. After looking through the notes again, Pip sees the phone number from Andy's planner and realizes that it's the same number that Naomi had called her from the other day to express her condolences about Barney. Apparently, Naomi had smashed her phone and was using an old SIM card of her dad's. Pip is absolutely floored by this. In no world did she ever imagine that one of her best friend's father could be tied up in this mess. At the Ward's house, she's able to access Elliot Ward's printer history through her friend Kara's laptop, finding all of the threatening notes that she had been given. Was this it? Did she actually find the killer? She and Ravi talk this out, and Elliot has no alibi for Friday night, as Naomi was at Max's house and Kara was at Pip's house. And he also doesn't have an alibi for Tuesday either, as he had called out sick. There are some gaps, but there's really no other explanation for why he would be threatening her or why he would have killed her dog. They also begin questioning the tutoring that Elliot says that he does, something that he started about 5 years ago. Maybe Andy was somehow still alive and he was visiting for her. Kara does say that food keeps disappearing from the house. The next day, Pip turns the Find My Friends feature on her phone on, getting a ride home from school from Elliot and leaving her phone in the car. She tracks it all the way to the Ward's old home, which apparently Elliot never sold. This has got to come to an end, and that night, Pip decides to confront Elliot, driving to the house and calling the police on her way. When she gets there, Elliot immediately breaks, telling Pip that he had been in a relationship with Andy. Disgusting. And she had shown up at his house the night she disappeared. The two got into a fight, Elliot pushed her, and Andy hit her head against his desk. He ran out of the room to get medical supplies, and when he came back, she was gone and had left her phone. He assumes at that point that she must have died in a ditch somewhere afterwards. Elliot needed to protect himself, though, and found out about the hit and run through Naomi's diary. He also saw Sal that Tuesday and suggested that the two go and talk. Here, he takes Sal back to his house, where he finds Sal's dad's sleeping pills. Elliot suggests that they go out to look for Andy, and when the two are alone in the woods, he's able to get Sal to eat the pills before wrapping a plastic bag around his head. He planted Andy's phone on Sal's body, along with some of her blood from his desk under Sal's fingernails. He then sent the confession text to Sal's dad. Then he reveals that later that summer, he was driving and he saw Andy walking down the road. He kidnaps her and takes her to the house they're in now, because if word got out that she was alive, his plan falls apart. Pip also accuses him of killing Barney here, but Elliot seems really confused about that. This is where Pip rushes to the attic, truly finding a blonde girl inside. However, this girl is not Andy Bell. This is where the police arrive, and Ravi is there as well, and Pip tells him everything. She also texts Kara to tell her what happened. Pip's not satisfied with this, though. Sure, they proved Sal's innocence, yet she still has not figured out what happened to Andy. She takes a look back at everything and realizes that the timelines don't really match up. Andy was seen leaving her house by car that night, but Elliot said that she walked to his house, along with his confusion surrounding Barney. The biggest thing, though, is the texts. The number that sent them was not the same as Elliot's spare number, and the language used was very different. Elliot always called her Pippa in the notes. The texts often referred to her as a bitch. After connecting all of the dots, the text, the spiked drinks, the missing burner phone, there's really only one conclusion that Pip can come to. She gets in a car and drives to a house that she has come to know very well. The Bells. Becca opens the door and is just the person Pip wants to see. She lays it all out, revealing that she knows that Becca had been drugged at one of the parties and was assaulted by Max. She thinks that Becca must have found out where Max had gotten the drugs and confronted Andy about it. Becca tells Pip that the night of Andy's disappearance, she did confront Andy when she got home that night. The two fought, and Becca pushed her sister to the ground, and Andy just laid there. She then began to get sick, throwing up on her face and choking on the vomit, and all Becca could do was watch. Andy finally went still, and Becca finally realized what happened. Her sister was dead. Her injury that she got at Elliot's house had already greatly affected her, and this was the final nail on the coffin. Freaking out, Becca loaded Andy into Andy's car, driving off and being seen by the security cameras and making the police believe that Andy had been the one driving. Becca drove out to an old farmhouse her father was considering buying and threw Andy's body into the septic tank. She left Andy's car near Howie's house, knowing that he was her dealer and hoping to implicate him. After learning that Pip was investigating the case, she texts her with Andy's old burner phone, hoping to get her to stop. She did kidnap Barney, but claims to have just let him go. This is where Pip's mind starts to get a little fuzzy, and Becca reveals that she drugged her with some of Andy's old stash. She couldn't let Pip leave here alive with the information. Luckily, Pip still had the Find My Friends turned on, and Ravi and Pip's dad were able to find her before anything too bad could happen. 2 months later, Pip is able to present her research and prove once and for all what had happened to both Andy Bell and Sal Singh. So, this is one of the first mystery/thriller books that I really had read in a long time, and it hooked me right from the jump. I really enjoyed the pacing and the overall plot. I also do really like the characters and the relationships between them. They feel relatively realistic as well. As realistic as a teen solving a murder case can be. If this book can get me out of my very comfy bed to buy the next ones in the series that same day, then I have to say that it's gotta be pretty good. However, let's get into why that is. Firstly, we have the format of this book. This book does not follow a traditional, narrative style, as I mentioned in the beginning. We get copies of transcripts, we get notes, we get suspect lists, and it's all mixed in with the more traditional storytelling style. I think this is really effective in getting the whole point across. This really allows us to be put into Pip's mind and really understand her thought process as she is working through this case. It also allows for conversations that might have gotten a little bit boring and repetitive to be shortened up through the transcript, so we just hear exactly what is said rather than needing all of the little bit of filler in between. Because of how many interviews there were, it would have gotten really repetitive, and I'm glad that Holly Jackson decided to take this away and just do the transcripts. I think it worked so well. Another part of this that I really enjoyed was the suspect list that Pip had that was ongoing throughout the entire series. Every time that she updated it or added somebody new, it really made you think about this person in a different light. It allowed you to understand exactly why Pip was putting them on the suspect list, and for me, it definitely kind of made me suspicious of that person even more. I also think that having these unconventional narrative forms helped to break up the story, and I think that aided a lot in the pacing. I thought that made the story flow a lot better, and overall, I just really enjoyed the way that this was structured, and I would love to read more books that are structured like this. Now, moving on to the characters, I'm going to start with Pip, our main character. Pip is a really interesting character for me due to the ways in which she is not your straightforward, quote-unquote, good girl, as the title suggests. She has very dubious and unconventional methods of interviewing people. She is not very considerate of their feelings when she interviews these people, and you can see that often gets her into tricky situations, such as when she tries to talk to Becca Bell. She gets way too personal, way too quick, and is often way more accusatory than somebody who is just doing a school project would ever be. However, this is an aspect of her character that I really enjoy. It shows how passionate that she is about this case and that how far she is willing to go to investigate this case, and I think that that's really, really interesting. In these typical YA books, you don't really see your main character being like this. Sure, you might see it in a fantasy book, but this isn't fantasy. This is mystery thriller set in the real world. So seeing a main character that is like this is really, really interesting, and I absolutely loved it. There's also just such an innocent determination to Pip. She is so convinced that she is going to be able to solve this case and figure it out and do it in a way that the police never could, and I love that about her. Is it unrealistic? Sure. However, I still love it, and I think that it's a great aspect to her character, and it really shows how driven that she is to finish things that she started and to prove that the people that she trusts are right. Overall, Pip, I found, was a very interesting character, and it's also really interesting to see the ways in which she develops in later books in the series. However, that's not what I'm here to get into today. I can talk about that at some other point if that's something that you guys would like to see or hear. This is a podcast. Next, I want to talk about Ravi. Ravi is so sweet and wholesome and is just the perfect opposite to Pip. He also has that kind of innocent determination, but at the same time, he's been a little bit more hardened by the realities of the world. He has had to directly face the consequences of people believing that his brother was a murderer, and that really affects the way in which he views a lot of the situations that he and Pip get into. Pip is always willing to dive head first because she doesn't think that there will be any consequences for her. People know her, and she thinks that because of that, she's able to get whatever she wants. However, Ravi knows that he has sort of a reputation of being a murderer's brother, a so-called murderer's brother, and that really affects the way that he goes about situations. He's a lot more cautious, and I think cautious is the best way to put it. He's just more cautious about everything. He is nervous about going into situations where he might confirm the idea people have of him and his family. It's a really interesting dynamic to see the two of them working together and figuring out how to solve this case given their two situations. And I do have to say that the two of them are so cute together. They have so many good moments between them that really just adds to the story, and I love them. It gets even better as the book goes on and as the entire series goes on. I love them so much. They are amazing, and they are definitely some of my favorite parts of this book. Now I want to get into the mystery. Was this even a good mystery? I do want to explain a little bit about how I tend to go about mystery books. I love to just go at them just for the ride. I want to feel all the emotions that characters are feeling and believe that this person is a suspect, and then suddenly they're not a suspect and somebody else is, and oh no, things are blowing up and it's a completely different case, and I love that feeling. I am not somebody that really likes to go and try and solve the mystery before the book tells me what's happening. It's just not really my sort of thing. I like just going along for the ride. I think that that's really fun, and that's what I did with this book. I fully believed that yes, Jason Bell definitely had something to do with this, and no, it had to be Max Hastings, and oh my goodness, out of nowhere, it's Elliot Ward. What? And Becca Bell? No. So, yes, I love that sort of thing. That is exactly the kind of way I like to read books. Speaking of Elliot Ward, do I think there was enough hints that made it seem as though he was the killer? Yes, the hints are there. The tutoring gets brought up very early on. There is the food that goes missing from the Ward's house. Max mentions that he found the topless picture in a classroom, and there's a whole bunch of other things that do eventually point to Elliot being the one that murdered Sal and the one that had a relationship with Andy. Because of the diary that Naomi kept, he has access to all of the same information that Naomi does, meaning that he had access to a lot more information than Pip ever really gave him credit for. So that is why he was never super high on her suspect list when he absolutely should have been. And overall, I think that there was definitely enough hints that when you go back and reread this book, you really do see exactly how him being Sal's killer was set up. I know I kind of sped through the reveal a little bit, but it does get set up really well. Like, there's a lot leading up to it, and there's just so many little details about this book that I just can't get into. Otherwise, this would be like a 2-hour long podcast, and I don't really want to do that. I just wanted to give you as basic of a plot summary as I could while still getting the important information out there. The information does come at you, though, in a realistic way, I think, and I don't know, I just think it works really well, and I don't think the reveal came out of nowhere. There are also plenty of hints that point to Becca as Andy's killer. The idea of her being drugged and assaulted at one of the Calamity parties is set up pretty early on. We don't really get to hear a lot about her, but we also do hear about the farmhouse, I'd say about 2/3 of the way through, so we know that that is a potential location for where Andy's body might have been. And she had access to Andy's car as well, and it all just kind of does click and it makes sense. There's just less information about Becca and her involvement in it, so I don't think this one was set up as well as Elliot, but the clues are still there and you could still figure this out. Through reading this book, it is hard to not notice the similarities to some other forms of media like this. And the big one that I noticed while reading this book was the similarities to the TV show Pretty Little Liars. I do really enjoy Pretty Little Liars. I think it started out as a really good show, and it's hard to not see specifically the similarities between Andy Bell and Alison De Laurentiis. Both girls go missing, both girls have a lot of secrets and a relative mean streak. They have dubious relationships with older men, and it's just kind of hard to not see the similarities between the two shows, or like the show and the book. I don't think this is a bad thing. However, I do think it is important to note that those similarities are there. And maybe the similarities are why I liked the book, because I do really enjoy the show. So I don't know, maybe that connection was there, and maybe that's why I liked it. Can't say for certain, but very well could be. I also do want to talk about some of the plot holes and potential concerns that do come up in this book. Firstly, I've seen a lot of people talking about the idea of like, why in the world would they let a high schooler solve a murder for her senior capstone project? That's not what they did. You're remembering it wrong. The show definitely confuses this because that's literally what she does in the show, and that makes me very angry, and I don't want to get into that. But she is not investigating the murder as her project. She is investigating the way the media portrayed people that were not officially convicted of a crime. Yes, she's solving the murder, but that is not what she told her teachers that she's doing, and that's not what she is giving them for information. The teachers are not letting her solve a murder for her capstone project. She is doing that, but that's not what she's telling them. And I think that's really important to note. Another plot hole that I do think is a little interesting is just Pip's easy access to all of these people. She's just able to go to these people's houses and talk to them and accuse them of things, and she doesn't really see any sort of consequences for these. Sure, she makes some people kind of annoyed, and some people definitely get mad at her, but a lot of the time she's still able to go back and talk to these people again and again and again. How does this happen? How does this work? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. This is one of the things that I don't love about this book. Another thing that I don't love is the way that Pip is just casually committing crimes throughout this entire book in order to solve this murder. Like, she is breaking and entering multiple times. She is blackmailing adults. She is doing all of these things that are actual crimes, and she faces no consequences for these whatsoever, even though I'm sure that when presenting what she found, some of these things had to have come up. How does that work? How does that happen? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. Overall, I do really enjoy this book and the series as a whole. I think that this is a really good YA mystery and thriller. That's important to note. This is not an adult's book, and I think that's why a lot of people felt as though they were too old to read this book. This is actually YA. This is what YA should be. This is not new adult parading as YA, and I think that's also important to realize that actual young adult is going to be catered towards a younger audience, like teenagers. That's what it is made for. New adult is for 18 and up. That's just how it goes. People need to remember that, and that's a pet peeve of mine that I really don't like. However, this is a YA mystery and thriller, and that's exactly what it is. No ifs, ands, buts about it. It is a YA mystery thriller. That being said, it's a really good YA mystery and thriller, and I think that the way that Holly Jackson weaves her characters and the mystery and relationships all together really serves the story well. I was fully invested in this book the entire time, and as I mentioned, I obviously couldn't wait to read the next book, had to go out and buy it, so I think that that's also a testament to how good the mystery and the story actually is. If you have somehow made it through this episode and have never read this book, seriously, please go pick up this book and read it. I know that everything's been spoiled for you, but still, it is so fun, and I highly, highly, highly encourage that you go and read this book. Please, it is so good. I absolutely love it. However, if this is not something that you're into, don't read it. You're probably not going to like it, but that's okay. You heard this, and now you know exactly what happens. So there we go. And yeah, that's going to be it for today's episode of the Book Corner. I hope you really, really enjoyed this. In my next episode, I'm going to be going through the book, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It's another book that I read when I recently got back into reading. It's kind of what pushed me to get back into reading, so I'm very excited to talk about it with you guys, and I hope that you are excited to hear about it. But yeah, that is it. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you all in the next episode of The Book Corner.